The Humvee rumbled to a stop, kicking up a cloud of fine Afghan dust that drifted over the concertina wire and settled on the faded fatigues of the soldiers at the checkpoint. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thorne wiped the grit from his brow with the back of a worn glove, his eyes scanning the familiar, oppressive landscape. The Forward Operating Base, FOB, a sprawling island of American military order in a sea of rugged mountainous terrain, baked under a relentless sun. For Marcus, it was just another day in a seemingly endless string of them. His detail for the afternoon was about as glamorous as it got: sandbag replenishment. He hopped down from the vehicle, the heat radiating off the armored plating, hitting him like a physical wall. "All right, listen up," he called out to the 4 young soldiers in his charge. And their faces were a mix of weariness and the nervous alertness that never really left you in a war zone. "We're headed to the Eastern Ammunition Supply Point. The bunkers there need reinforcing. Looks like the last dust storm did a number on the outer walls. It's a gear and grunt detail. No heroes, no shortcuts. Just swapping out the busted sandbags for fresh ones. You got me?" A chorus of "Yes, Sergeant," answered him. They fell into a loose formation and began the walk across the FOB. The base was a strange paradox of frantic activity and dull monotony. Helicopters thudded overhead, kicking up more dust, while a few hundred meters away, a soldier sat on a HESCO barrier, meticulously cleaning his rifle for the 3rd time that day. The air smelled of jet fuel, sweat, and the faint, dusty scent of the ancient land beyond the wire. Sir Marcus led his team past the motor pool, where mechanics wrestled with the engine of a mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicle, their curses a familiar kind of music. They skirted the edge of the small chapel, a plywood structure with a simple cross nailed above the door, and finally approached the logistics sector. This was the beating heart of the base's survival, a labyrinth of shipping containers, pallets of supplies, and the heavily fortified ammunition bunkers. The bunkers were large, earth-covered concrete structures designed to contain any accidental explosions. Their entrances were protected by walls of HESCO baskets, collapsible wire mesh containers lined with heavy-duty fabric and filled with dirt and gravel. These, and the thousands of individual sandbags piled around them, they were the first and last line of defense against mortars and small arms fire. "All right, Thorne's Terriers," Marcus announced, using his unofficial nickname for his squad. "Let's find the supply sergeant and get this party started." He found him near a staging area, a harried-looking staff sergeant named Kowalski, whose clipboard seemed like an extension of his arm. After the usual military runaround of signing forms and getting a point of contact, Kowalski pointed them toward Bunker 7. "The east wall is starting to slump. Just replace the rotten ones on the outer layer. Don't go messing with the structural integrity of the inner walls. I don't need a cave-in on my watch." "Roger that," Marcus said, and led his men to the bunker. Bunker 7 was a hulking, silent mass of concrete and earth, and the sandbags surrounding its reinforced steel door were indeed a sorry sight. Years of exposure to the elements had caused many of the burlap sacks to rot and split, their dusty innards spilling out onto the ground like the guts of some forgotten beast. The wooden pallets they sat on were warped and cracked. "All right, let's get to it," Marcus ordered. "Miller, Reyes, you're on tear out. Johnson, you're with me on fill and stack. Patterson, keep an eye on the perimeter and make sure we've got a clean path to the fresh bag pile." The work was monotonous and physically demanding. The tear-out team used hooks and their hands to drag the decayed sandbags away, tossing them onto a growing pile for later disposal. The fill team worked with empty burlap sacks and a small mountain of gravel. One would hold a bag open while the other shoveled. And then they'd heave the heavy, rough sack onto a growing stack near the bunker wall. The sun beat down, and within an hour, their uniforms were dark with sweat, a fine layer of grit coating every exposed inch of skin. It was during one of these fill and stack rotations that Marcus noticed the corner of a wooden pallet that seemed different from the others. Most of the pallets under the sandbags were the standard rough-hewn type, stained and splintered. This one, partially hidden beneath a particularly large and still intact stack of older sandbags, appeared to be made of a darker, harder wood. It looked almost like it was part of a shipping crate, something more substantial than a simple pallet. His curiosity was purely mechanical at first. If the wood was stronger, and he might be able to use it to create a more stable base for the new bags. He gestured to Johnson. "Hold on a sec. Let's clear these last few bags off that corner. I want to check out that pallet." They grunted and heaved, moving the heavy sandbags aside. As the last bag was removed, Marcus saw that it wasn't a pallet at all. It was the corner of a large, heavy-duty wooden crate, painted a faded olive drab. The wood was old but sturdy. Stenciled on its side, barely visible under layers of grime and dust, was a series of numbers and letters. He knelt down, wiping the dirt away with his glove. The markings were military, but the format was older, from a different era. Then he saw it. Below the faded nomenclature, a symbol was stenciled in stark black paint. It was a simple yet deeply evocative design. A sprig of nightshade, and its leaves and berries rendered in sharp, almost artistic detail, enclosed within a circle. Marcus froze. His heart, which had been hammering from the physical exertion, seemed to skip a beat. Nightshade. He knew that symbol. Every soldier who had been through the advanced survival and escape training knew that symbol. It was the unofficial insignia of the Strategic Intelligence Support Detachment, the shadowy unit that operated so far in the black that most of the official records didn't even acknowledge its existence. They were the ghosts, the ones who went so deep into denied territory that they were considered deniable assets. If you saw the Nightshade insignia on a piece of equipment, it meant that equipment and whoever used it was involved in things that were not discussed, not written down, and often never spoken of again. "What is it, Sergeant?" Johnson asked, noticing his sudden stillness. Marcus didn't answer. He traced the outline of the nightshade with his finger. The crate was buried, not just sitting on the ground, but deliberately built into the very foundations of this ammunition bunker. The newer sandbags and Hesco baskets had been placed around it, using it as a structural anchor point. This wasn't a piece of forgotten storage. This was a deliberate placement. Someone, decades ago, had built this bunker around this crate. "Patterson!" Marcus called out, his voice low but carrying a new, sharp edge. "Get over here!" Patterson, a young specialist from Ohio with a perpetually curious nature, jogged over. "Yeah, Sarge," Marcus pointed at the crate. "See if you can get a crowbar under the edge of that thing. Don't damage the crate. Just see if the lid is accessible." It took them a few minutes of digging and prying, but they managed to clear enough debris from the top of the crate. The wooden lid was held in place by heavy-duty rusted latches. They weren't locked. With a screech of protest from the old metal, Patterson pried the first one open, then the second. "Stand back," Marcus ordered, his instincts flaring. You never knew what was in old sealed munitions crates. He took a deep breath, the dusty air filling his lungs, and used the crowbar to lever the heavy lid upward. It opened with a groan, revealing a dark interior lined with waxed canvas and strips of packing foam that had long since turned to a crumbly yellow dust. The first thing Marcus saw was the glint of metal, and nestled within the custom-cut foam of the crate's interior were objects that looked like they belonged in a museum, or perhaps the nightmare of a Cold War spy. There were several rectangular heavy-duty radios, their casings a dull battleship gray, with knobs and dials that were far more analog than anything used in the modern battlefield. Next to them were compact, folding stock carbines, not the standard M4s they carried, but older models, Car 15s by the look of them, with suppressor attachments that were long and bulbous, primitive by today's standards. But what truly drew Marcus's eye was the collection of items in a separate compartment. A compact 16mm film camera, the kind used for clandestine surveillance before the digital age. A set of lock-picking tools, their steel still gleaming. Several leather-bound notebooks, and their pages yellowed with age, and a collection of innocuous-looking civilian clothing, folded with a precision that was unmistakably military. A plain gray suit, a simple dress, a pair of sturdy but unremarkable shoes. This is a ghost locker, Patterson whispered, his eyes wide. I've heard stories about these. Teams that went so far off the grid they couldn't even trust the supply chain. They'd cache their own gear. Marcus carefully lifted one of the notebooks. The cover was blank. He opened it. The handwriting was small, precise, and in a code he didn't recognize. But on the inside cover, written in the same steady hand, was another sprig of nightshade, drawn with the same stark detail as the one on the crate. Below it, in English, were 2 lines, Major Elias Vance. The gardener. A chill ran down Marcus's spine, one that had nothing to do with the temperature. This wasn't just any cache. This was the personal gear of a specific operative. The fact that it was buried here in a remote FOB in Afghanistan meant that Major Vance's mission had ended here, one way or another, decades ago. This wasn't a forgotten supply drop. This was a tomb of secrets. A sudden shadow fell over them. Just what in the hell do you think you're doing? The voice was low, controlled, and colder than the desert night. Marcus looked up. Standing a few feet away was a man he hadn't heard approach. He was a full-bird colonel, his uniform pristine, his face a hard mask. He was flanked by 2 military police officers, their hands resting on their sidearms. The colonel's eyes were not on Marcus, however. They were fixed on the open crate, and on the Nightshade Insignia on its side. For a fraction of a second, the colonel's stoic facade cracked. Marcus saw it, a flicker of something primal in the man's eyes, recognition and fear. The colonel's gaze snapped back to Marcus. I asked you a question, Sergeant. Sir, we were assigned to sandbag detail for this bunker, sir. We discovered this crate during the reinforcement process, sir, Marcus reported, his body snapping to attention out of pure instinct. The colonel stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. He looked into the crate, his jaw tightening as he took in the contents. He didn't touch anything. He just looked, his face an unreadable mask once more. The moment stretched, thick with tension. Who else has seen this? The colonel asked, his voice quiet. Just my detail, sir. 4 men. The colonel nodded slowly. He turned to the MPS. Secure this bunker. No one in or out without my direct authorization. He then fixed his gaze on Marcus. You and your men will forget what you saw here today. This crate, its contents, this conversation, none of it happened. You were reassigned to a different detail. You spent the afternoon reinforcing the northern perimeter HESCO baskets. Is that understood, Sergeant? It wasn't a request. It was an order wrapped in a threat. Marcus knew the military's labyrinthine rules, but he also knew that some rules existed in a realm far above the uniform code of military justice. He had just stumbled into that realm. Sir, yes, sir, Marcus said, his voice firm. The colonel held his gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment, as if assessing the depth of his obedience. Then, with a final, unlingering look at the crate, he turned and walked away, leaving Marcus and his stunned team standing in the shadow of Bunker 7, the weight of an unspoken history pressing down on them. Later that night, long after they had been shuffled off to a meaningless task on the northern perimeter, Marcus lay in his bunk, staring at the corrugated metal ceiling of the barracks. The image of the nightshade was burned into his mind. He thought of Major Elias Vance. The gardener. What had he planted in this rugged land? What harvest had he reaped? And what secret was so important, so dangerous, that it needed to be buried within the walls of an ammunition bunker for over 40 years, guarded by layers of sand and silence? He knew he would probably never get the answers. That was the nature of the nightshade. Their work was done in the shadows, and their stories unwritten, their very existence a matter of rumor and speculation. As he finally drifted off to sleep, the only sound was the distant thump of artillery and the ever-present whisper of the wind across the desert, carrying with it the secrets of 100 wars and the ghosts of the men who fought them. The sandbags around Bunker 7 would be replaced, the crate would be sealed once more, and the story of the gardener would remain buried, waiting perhaps for another soldier, another war, and another chance to be uncovered.